I've been farming salt crust since I was 19. 43 acres of flat nothing on Vithara's reach, half of it alkaline pan that won't grow anything but sedge grass and old regret. The other half tolerable if you nurse it. My father called it a homestead. I call it the only thing I know how to do. I found her in the grain cistern on the back third of the property, the sealed one, the old press dome with the ventilation fault I'd been meaning to fix for 2 years. I went out to fix it that morning because the overnight sensor had flagged a pressure differential, and I thought, rats, or a cracked seal. What I found was a sorrel child curled in the dark at the bottom of the cistern ladder, knees to her chest, copper bronze skin filmed with cistern dust, silver hair plastered to the side of her face. Alive. Barely. Her eyes opened when my lamp reached her. Mint green, oversized the way sorrel eyes always are, and looking at me with the particular expression of something that has run entirely out of options and is now simply waiting to see what the next thing will be. Not afraid, not hopeful, just waiting. I climbed down and gave her my water flask. That's the whole of it, really. Everything else was just the consequence of that. Her name was Vey, as near as I could render it in sounds my mouth could make. She'd been in the cistern for what I later calculated was 2 days. She'd gotten in through the ventilation fault I hadn't fixed, a gap in the secondary screen just large enough for a small body to compress through if the body in question was desperate enough. Her people had a resettlement contact on the far side of the reach, 3 days' drive across the salt flat by crawler. She'd been trying to reach them on foot when the heat broke her. I set her up in the spare room, fed her, found a sorrel language base on the Colonial Transit net, and spent 3 evenings learning enough to tell her she was safe, that no one was coming through my door, and that I would take her across when she was ready. She listened to all of it. Then she pointed at the window, the one that faced east, where the salt flat went on until it dissolved in shimmer, and asked me one thing I couldn't translate but understood completely. She wanted to know if they could find her here. I told her no, I didn't know if that was true. It wasn't. The Korath Hunting Commission sent 1 man. They usually only need 1. He arrived on the 4th day in a low-slung crawler with Korath markings on the panels, the stylized bracket seal that means licensed reclamation, which is the Commission's way of saying they've purchased the right to collect something and intend to do so. He parked at my perimeter gate and waited. They do that. They have learned, over generations of this particular work, that waiting at the gate is usually enough, that the person inside will come out, that they will negotiate, or explain, or try to buy a way out, that they will, ultimately, hand over what the Commission has come for. I watched him from the kitchen window for about 20 minutes. Then I went out. He was a large man, Korath bred, with the Commission's certification seal pinned to his collar, and a biological retrieval scanner on his belt that was probably already pinging Vey's signal through my walls. He looked at me the way people look at problems they expect to resolve quickly. He told me the child was registered under Warrant 7 of the Korath Noble Dissolution Act, property of the dissolved Sorrel House Vethran, now legally transferred to the Korath Reclamation Pool under the Interspecies Asset Settlement Treaty. He had a writ. He showed it to me. It was real. I read it carefully. Then I told him I had no idea what he was talking about. He recalibrated, tried again, told me the scanner was showing a sorrel biological signature in my secondary structure, and that under the Treaty of Veth Crossing, ratified 12 years prior by both the Colonial Compact and the Korath Governing Authority, he had the legal right to conduct a premises search. I said, I know what the Treaty of Veth Crossing says. He hadn't expected that. What the Treaty of Veth Crossing actually says, in Subarticle 14, Paragraph 9, is that a licensed commission agent may conduct premises searches only after a 48-hour notice period has been filed with the local Colonial Compact Administrative Office. It is a formality. It was inserted by a junior compact negotiator who nobody remembers, probably because it was the only concession she could get, and the Korath side agreed to it because they assumed no one on the frontier would ever use it. The 48-hour notice provision had, to my knowledge, never once been invoked in the 12 years since the treaty was ratified. I invoked it. I told him he could file his notice at the Compact Admin Office in Veth Crossing, 3 hours west by crawler. That once the 48-hour window opened, I would be happy to discuss the matter further. That until then, he was standing outside my gate on my registered agricultural land, and I was going inside to finish my morning's work. He looked at me for a long time. I looked back. There is a thing that happens in those moments. I do not know what it looks like from the outside. From where he was standing. From where I was standing, it felt like nothing at all. I was not angry. I was not afraid. I had a 48-hour window and a child in my spare room, and 3 days' worth of driving ahead of me if I left before sunrise the next morning, which I intended to do. I did not explain any of this. I just waited for him to finish looking at me. He filed the notice. Of course he did. It was the only legal path available to him, and commission agents are nothing if not methodical about staying legal. He drove 3 hours west to file it. Then he drove 3 hours back and parked outside my gate again, because that is what they do. They wait. Vay and I were already gone. I drove the salt flat in the dark with the running lights off, and the crawler's transponder cycling through a sequence of maintenance codes that technically constituted a signal maintenance procedure under Colonial Survey Regulation 7B, and technically prevented any civilian scanner from logging my position. Was that legal? It was a frontier moon, and a maintenance code, and I was a salt farmer who had read every transit regulation in the Colonial Library database during 11 years of evenings with nothing else to do. I leave the question of legality to people with more time and better lawyers. We reached the resettlement contact at dawn. A Sorrel woman named Oressa Vell, coordinator for 4 receiving families on the far side of the reach. She came out of the receiving house door before the crawler stopped moving. She had been waiting. The look on her face when she saw Vay climb down from the cab is not something I have words for, so I won't try. I signed 3 forms, drank a cup of something hot that tasted like burnt grain, watched Oressa Vell's hand resting on Vay's silver hair, and Vay leaning into it like a thing that had been cold for a long time finally finding warmth. Then I drove home across the salt flat in the morning light, which is very beautiful if you have an eye for flat things. The commission filed a complaint. The Colonial Compact processed it for 14 months, and then dismissed it on procedural grounds. The 48-hour window, again, this time working against the commission rather than for me, because the notice had been filed improperly, and the compact office clerk had logged it 6 minutes late. I did not arrange that. I did not need to. The machinery was just the machinery. 11 years later, I was patching the secondary cistern screen, finally, properly, with the right sealant, when a crawler came up the track from the main road and stopped at my perimeter gate. A young woman got out. Sorrel, copper bronze, silver hair braided back from her face. Taller than I expected. Eyes the same mint green, but older in them now, in the way that eyes get when they have done difficult things and decided to keep going anyway. She had a compact transit coordinator's badge pinned to her collar. She stood at my gate and looked at me across 43 acres of salt crust and alkaline pan and sedge grass, and I put down my sealant brush and walked over. She said something in Sorrel. Then, in careful colonial standard, you didn't have to. I thought about the cistern, the ventilation fault, the flask of water, the 48-hour window, and the salt flat in the dark. I know, I said. She stayed for dinner. We talked for 3 hours, the resettlement network, the 14 receiving families she now coordinated across 4 moons, how the Treaty of Veth Crossing had been amended, Sub-Article 14, Paragraph 9, expanded to 72 hours. After complaints she and Oressa Vell had spent 6 years filing. I walked her to the gate at dusk. She paused there, one hand on the latch. "The cistern," she said. "Is it still there?" I told her it was. She nodded once, like a thing that had wanted to know and now knew. Then she drove back down the track into the shimmer. I went back to my patching. The evening was quiet. The flat went on in all directions the way it always does, and I was home, and that has always been enough.